Welcome back to News at Prime to Business. Now, small businesses are demanding bigger support and the slice of the national fiscus when Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivers his budget speech tomorrow. Xolani Mbanjwa is in Parliament to speak to entrepreneurs about what tomorrow's budget must entail. Xolani, everyone wants a piece of this year's budget. A lot expected tomorrow from Enoch Godongwana. What should he do?
Good evening, Muteo. It's a difficult balancing act as always. I think the last sort of easier budget speech may have been before the financial crisis of 2008, but since then it's been quite a difficult balancing act for many of the predecessors of Enoch Godongwana. And as you've heard throughout the day, we've been bringing you some expectations, particularly from civil society. Wintogozo out at the St. George's Cathedral. It's an important day tomorrow because of the numbers that we saw in terms of unemployment earlier today. So on this particular evening, we're speaking to entrepreneurs, trying to find out what they would want to see from this budget speech, what the slice of the pie should actually be cut for them, as it is said that they are the biggest employers. I'm joined by Vusi Vogwana, who's the founder of Kasi Catalyst, somebody who is very au fait with how the township economy works. Vusi, thank you so much for your time this evening. A lot is expected of Enoch Godongwana tomorrow as small businesses and as someone who works closely in the township economy. What do you want to see tomorrow?
Thank you so much for having me. I think one of the most critical things that we are expecting to see is some kind of favor from government. You know, they've talked about a shared prosperity, and I think we as township entrepreneurs and rural entrepreneurs who try to operate in marginalized communities in South Africa, we want to get a slice of that shared prosperity. And we know that they are the biggest obstacle that we face is access to finance. And we want to say in the budget speech tomorrow specifics as to what portion of the R1 billion that has been allocated towards black business is going to be earmarked specifically for township economies and rural economies. We want to see less of the funding going to the administration that then causes the red tape that makes it impossible for us to access finance. We want to see from the minister some sort of punitives that are in place for those companies that don't allow us into supply chains, but we also want to see incentives. So we want some kind of tax reductions that we can get, because as you know, most township economies are starting to shrink on the retail side, not just because of the spaza crisis, but mostly because of the crime and the criminal element that is just destroying our businesses in townships and in rural economies. So what we want from government is some kind of a redress that goes directly to our pockets as entrepreneurs, where we get to see tax breaks, from government. We want to see businesses incentivized to go back into townships and open manufacturing hubs and open training hubs and start to revive or reinvigorate township economies. The only way we can do that is through proper tax incentives that make it the place du jour to operate a business.
Let's talk about something that we touched on earlier, how difficult it is for small businesses to also operate in an environment where if infrastructure in the township economy is not so good, but also you have to deal with extortion. What do you want to hear tomorrow in terms of the help that may come to small businesses, who, by the way, are said to be the ones who can absorb the millions of the unemployed in this country?
So I think the main thing is that needs to be understood by the minister is that township economies and rurals are an ecosystem that operates with zero redundancies. And so if you keep that in mind, then you understand that if you provide access to finance and you build or you provide incentives to make infrastructural challenges that we face, that are legacies of apartheid, that are the legacies of the Bantustans, if government can set aside budgets for those key items, then it will trickle into those economies to make it easier for us to operate, but it will also have a way of hampering the amount of criminal element that we have in our spaces, because the majority of the criminal element stems from the fact that running businesses is so difficult. Access to capital is hard, once again. Operating in these marginalized spaces is almost impossible. Just access to digital anything. So technological advancements are something that we hear about from a distance. It's the luxuries of living in an urban space. The cost of data per gigabyte in townships is the highest you can imagine. And it's because of things like wayleaves that are owned by white big business. So what we want to see is the minister speaking specifically to those things. So those companies that own wayleaves to properties that are in townships, that have access to then charging us higher pricing on on access to the internet, those are the people that should be penalized. So they should have a tax burden, while we should have tax incentives to make it easier for us to then put in these, in internet or connectivity interventions in our own communities. But most of all, we want to see budgets set aside for capacitating the locals, so the support sectors that are existing in townships and in rural areas that we know have been operating for a long time. Gone are the days when government can set aside funding for NGOs that are coming in from outside of South Africa, for one, but second, from outside of these specific economies. I think we're looking at a global stage where we get to see what happens when you are overly focused on donor contributions, right? So now it means we need to be looking at how do we localize, how do we capacitate these local communities, how do we use the systems that exist within townships and within rural communities that can then mitigate the risks, right, for investment.
Let's talk lastly about, you spoke about the 1 billion rand funding, but there's also been this talk of this transformation fund that is going to fund small businesses like yourselves. That is 100 billion rands. It's still early days. It's still a DTIC idea. It hasn't even been given a go-ahead from the minister's side. You are in support of that transformation fund that is going to be 100 billion rand to support small businesses, I'm sure.
Absolutely. We're always in support of any funding that's earmarked to townships. But where the disconnect comes in is in how many people have ever accessed these funds. So for us, it always feels like it's a kabuki theater. They show us these big funds. They talk about them at, budget speech time. And then we never see them again. We never hear of them. There's no reporting as to who got the monies. We never hear anecdotal evidence from actual township entrepreneurs or actual rural entrepreneurs claiming to have ever accessed the funding. There are models that operate in townships where people are able to disperse. What our government has shown us consistently for 3 decades is a clear inability to disperse. They can attract funding, they can tell us about it, they can create plans on how to disperse, they can bring in experts from all over the globe, so there's a very consensus-driven environment, but what they never have is actual implementers from these communities and from these economies that understand the lived experience of these entrepreneurs who are then able to disperse this funding to the intended beneficiaries. So we want a share of this shared prosperity they keep alluding to, that we keep seeing urban businesses, experiencing. We also want to be in the game.
Vusi Vogwana is the founder of Kasi Catalyst. She says there's a lot expected of Enoch Godongwana, the Minister of Finance, at 2 p.m. Tomorrow afternoon from this dome, where he will be delivering the 2025 budget speech. It's a voice of the marginalized small businesses saying this is the important part. This is the important, these are important issues for them to actually grow and absorb those millions who are unemployed. Back to you in Studio Muteo.